They had a standalone circuit.
Jean, is that where you're going to be sitting?
I'm gonna sit and stand. Is
Okay.
it? Do I need to like stay in the same spot?
That was
Okay.
really, I mean, that impressed the clients.
But if you could kind of pay attention to this side.
Okay.
That's
You're gonna
enough.
have to tell me if
No, that's
I
fine.
generally have a pretty loud voice, so
Yeah.
people don't normally complain that I'm too soft. I speak too softly.
Wi-Fi's working in here for you, right? All right, good morning.
Good morning. What?
How's everyone doing this morning? Good?
Oh, really? Yeah. Because this seems like
Did, how many people were here yesterday? Good. All right. Well, welcome to the Tech Support Collaboration Session. I'd like to introduce you to Jean Butson, the president and founder of Mission Plus Strategy Consulting. And I'll go ahead and turn over to her.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be with you today. This is a subject near and dear to my heart. Just tell you a little bit about my business. We are a full spectrum consulting firm focusing on 4 lines of business. So we do strategic restructuring for nonprofit organizations, so mergers, partnerships, alliances, networks for nonprofit organizations. We also do strategic planning, financial analysis, and organizational development, mostly focusing around strategy for nonprofit organizations. And I just have a simple referral card here if anybody's interested. And I love talking about the subject of collaboration, and I truly believe that we are in an age of collaboration in the nonprofit sector. And we have 90 minutes, and I want to tell you what we're going to cover. And I just really want to encourage you, if there's anything that I have not said that we're going to cover that you want to cover in this agenda, feel free to ask questions. So I generally like to begin by explaining why is the subject of collaboration such a hot topic in the sector. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and define some terms. And so we'll do that for the first 3 topics. And then we're going to get into talking about some collaboration examples. And we're going to talk about intra-sector collaborations and cross-sector collaborations. So intra-sector between nonprofits and cross-sector between business to nonprofit collaborations. We'll talk a little bit about how to maximize a collaboration, and then key issues to consider when selecting partners. And then we'll talk a little bit about funding sources for collaboration and close out with some key points. Okay? So as I said, if you want to ask questions, please interrupt me at any point throughout the 90 minutes that we're going to be together. And we'll just does that sound okay to everybody? Okay. And just want to talk a little bit about why to collaborate. There's a great quote by Jim Austin, who's an emeritus faculty member from Harvard Business School, who he's written a lot about business to nonprofit collaborations, just wrote a brand new book that if you're interested in this subject, called Creating Value in Nonprofit to Business Collaborations. Being a collaboration underachiever is tantamount to throwing value away. And I really believe that if you're not collaborating, you are leaving value on the table. This is the age of collaboration in the nonprofit sector. And if you're not collaborating, if you're not in multiple collaborations, you are not leveraging your assets adequately. So you'll hear that repetitively throughout this presentation. So let's kind of get into it. So why do I say that? Well, for one thing, 96% of the world's 257 largest non-financial enterprises were engaged on average in 18 cross-sector partnerships. In 2010, 87% of non-governmental organizations and 96% of businesses considered partnerships with each other important. Most were engaged in 11 to 50 or more partnerships. And just to give you another example, in 2012, a California survey of small and mid-sized organizations found that 74% of the nonprofits and 88% of the companies were partnering, with over 50% having 5 partnerships. So this is happening, not just in the United States, but all over the world. So, and they are achieving amazing kinds of results. So true collaborations have 4 things. They have a commitment to mutual relationships and goals, a jointly developed structure and shared responsibility, mutual authority and accountability for success, and sharing of resources and rewards. And we can get into some details on that. So let's talk a little bit about why are we hearing so much about collaboration. And I want to talk a little bit about these 6 topics. First of all, for some time now, there's been huge pressure to raise unrestricted funds for back office expenses and for other expenses. And I think most nonprofits know just how hard it is to raise unrestricted funding. That's been a huge driver to partner and to collaborate. A second reason is that government itself is moving to more managed care kinds of contracting. Managed care as a business model, it really forces consolidation, forces entities that it's doing business with to consolidate. And if you're in human services at all, and I'm not sure if any of you are, it's just really the pressure to consolidate is there in order to get down costs. There's also just a shift to measuring results in the nonprofit organization. So this whole topic of data collection, outcome measurement, all of that is incredibly expensive to do. It takes a lot of skill. Not every nonprofit organization can do that. This is, I'm sure, a big topic in this conference for the last 2 days. How do you do that? And so one of the big drivers for partnerships, consolidations, mergers is to access those talents. And we'll talk more about that. There's also just a huge impending leadership gap in the nonprofit sector. This baby boomer generation is retiring, leaving a lot of leadership positions open. Organizations are collaborating to access skills and leadership talent. And then there's just the simple complexity of social problems. One nonprofit organization cannot solve some of the most incredibly complex problems that we're faced with. And this kind of gets into some of the topics that we'll talk about. You know, this topic of wicked problems. Have people heard that term, wicked problems? So it's wicked problems like global warming, or to something not quite as complex as that, but childhood obesity, the problem with graduation rates in high schools. These are problems that are so complex that one institution really cannot solve these problems by themselves. It's going to take a network of organizations, a network of civic and government institutions, private institutions, and sometimes for-profit institutions coming together to really solve them. And this is what's driving collaboration in our sector. And by far, I would say it's this last point that's really driving collaboration. I have to tell you, there's some amazing, amazing collaborations that are happening in the country and in the world. And once you start to find out about them, you can get incredibly passionate and excited because you begin to see what the possibilities are for really trying to tackle and solve some problems in our community. Does anybody want to add anything to that? Are there problems? Are there reasons that you're seeing that are driving people to collaborate that I haven't mentioned? Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Anybody want to mention something? Yeah.
We're getting pressure from our funders, Amanda from Heartland Alliance, and a lot of our funding, we're required by HUD to now be part of continuums of care across the entire country. If you receive that
Right.
funding. So
Right.
that's one way that we've been pressured, just by
Right.
centralizing our wait lists and everyone that accesses our services in the entire city. If you're funded in by this stream, has to pull from the same lists to keep the model going of
Mhm.
housing first.
Right.
So that it's coming through all sorts of channels for us.
Very good point. So donors, funders, government agencies are pressuring. Anybody else want to add to that?
And maybe this comes under cost. I see a case around political campaigns that have to continuously sort of rebuild, data sets around voter histories, unless they find some way to share that with, prior organizations. But the challenge there is, who do we feel comfortable sharing this information with?
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's a lot of, it's sort of what Terry was talking about a little bit at the end there. How do you share the data? And yeah, good point. Yes?
So I was a little bit torn between this session and the other meetup session, only because I run a somewhat regular meetup, which involves kind of volunteer data scientists and analysts, who are in the city, who meet regularly and trying to make a collaboration between nonprofits and people who have technical skills who in their free time want to be working with those nonprofits. Actually, that is something that is an emerging, I would
Great.
say, kind of collaboration style, which is something that represents capacity outside of nonprofits, but is still trying to find a way to identify the right tools or the right models, or like to have enough capacity to have volunteer hours, to either level up nonprofits or to find sustainable
Oh, that's
collaborations.
great. That's great. Well, when we get into the models, the one thing that I really want to stress is, so I'm going to talk about models, but you have to really play with these models to figure out how to make them work for you and for your constituencies, because these are not static. They're not, carved in stone. You can really make them, they're very flexible and they can work in a myriad kinds of ways. So that's great what you're doing. I love it. Okay, let's keep going. And so I want to just stress from the beginning that we're going to talk about models, and these models are either simple, complicated, or complex. And, form follows function, so you have to figure out what your needs are. And, it's a diverse audience, it's a diverse world. And so, as we go through the models, some may apply to you, some may not. And as I said, you have to kind of play with them and think about them in terms of your context. So I'm going to talk about specific situations. You have to sort of take out the specifics and put yourself in them to sort of get a picture of how it might work for you. And the one thing that I want to stress is that the way these models work, we think about them along a continuum, and that continuum varies according to the level of corporate or program integration that is required in order to achieve the model, okay? And specifically, when we're thinking about restructuring models that actually require that we're going to integrate program or corporate structure, that blue area, that's where the level of risk starts to occur, but also where the highest level of opportunity and value starts to really occur as well. And today, we're going to talk about just a specific area of the collaboration continuum. We're not going to talk about the whole continuum. We're only going to talk about a portion of it, okay? And that's that portion that allows organizations to maintain their autonomy, but still requires a certain level of integration to occur in order for true value creation to happen between the organizations, okay? Does that make sense? All right, so I want to begin by looking at intra-sector examples, so nonprofit to nonprofit collaborations. And I'm going to start with the simplest form along that continuum, which are joint venture partnerships. And this first example is one that I really love that comes from by way of Chattanooga, Tennessee. And it's 3 museums, the Tennessee Aquarium, the Hunter Museum of American Art, and the Discovery Museum. And in this collaboration, it's really an administrative partnership where the three museums came together and said, you know, we'd really like to share the administrative infrastructure of the Tennessee Aquarium because we would like to achieve efficiencies, lower our operating expenses in order to be able to reinvest the savings in our programs. So the two partners, Creative Discovery Museum and Hunter Museum of American Art, and the three kind of form a campus there, kind of like our museum campus, went to the Tennessee Aquarium and said, would you agree to form a partnership, and would you allow us to purchase these administrative services from the aquarium? And the aquarium said, yeah, we would be happy to do that. And so in their partnership, each organization remains an autonomous organization. They maintain individual identities, but the Tennessee Aquarium becomes the lead partner in this administrative partnership and provides HR services, finance and accounting, IT services, certain marketing services, and does some things like, you know, provides advertising buys for the three of them and things along that line of services. And the three are also doing joint programming, and because of the level of integration that's happening, they've actually expanded a lot of programming and have become a key driver for the city of Chattanooga in terms of bringing in tourism and expanding the economic impact of what the three of them are doing for the city of Chattanooga. And this is a key thing that you'll see very often in collaboration, where 1 + 1 = 3, or in this case, 1 + 1 + 1 = 5. You know, that not only are they getting the efficiencies, but by creating the partnership, they are creating something much more than the efficiencies. And so I want you to think about this in terms of your own organizations. This is three museums. They had something specific to do here, but with a very simple structure. In this case, it's a joint venture partnership agreement, and they have a contract. They are able to share and get so much more from it. And by the way, the Tennessee Aquarium is getting some very valuable income from doing this as well. So really nice structure, very simple to achieve. And you can take out and put in, you know, the services. What are those services? They could be IT services. They could be different types of actors, you know, different kinds of organizations, same structure. Any questions about this?
Yeah, I gotta say this. So, if to the extent that the shared function is not part of the core mission of a couple of those, this to me looks like outsourcing. Is it?
It could be that way, except they have the joint programming. You know, the three executives are managing and governing the partnership. So it's gone beyond the simple fee-for-service purchase of back office services, which you might see, because they're doing the joint programming and they're expanding beyond that in terms of trying to create something that's more mission-driven. Does that make sense? So I understand your point, but
So it actually is. So the shared services actually is. So I'm outsourcing. I'm going to outsource.
oh, so let me give you another example. So the three did they did a big capital fundraising project together, and they jointly raised several $1 million to enhance the three museums for the museum campus. So they're doing a lot of different projects together that kind of go beyond just, oh, you know, can you do my financial services for me?
All right. I think, yeah. I'm outsourcing. I'm not outsource stuff that I really don't care about. It's not part of my mission. But this is, I'm bringing something in that I can incorporate with my mission.
Yeah, they're really trying to leverage what they do in terms of the mission. Does that make sense? Okay. And when you talk to them, you know, and I have talked to the person who's the manager of the partnership, it's really clear they're doing it from a very stewardship perspective. It's really cool. All right, so the next model I want to talk about, which I also think could really work very nicely for IT services, is a management service organization model. And this is actually a model that's been around for a long time for hospitals, but a lot of nonprofit organizations are adapting this model. And a management service organization definition is a freestanding corporate entity which provides services to 2 or more nonprofit organizations on a fee-for-service basis in order to gain operating efficiencies and to increase the quality of management systems in 1 or more areas by consolidating costly overhead. So the idea is that a group of nonprofits come together, they pool the money they want to spend on particular services, and then they jointly purchase those services together. A management service organization is usually a not-for-profit, but it doesn't have to be. It could also be a for-profit entity. And it is governed by the organizations that are purchasing the service. You can also outsource your services to others on a fee-for-service basis and generate profits for the MSO. And in this case, we're looking at an example called Mac Commonwealth. This is a very famous example. It's up in the Twin Cities area. It was created by a coalition of community-based organizations, and 10 of their members came together to create this MSO because they simply could not afford a lot of their back office services. And if you know, a lot of small nonprofit organizations can't afford HR services, they can't afford IT services, they can't afford things. So you've got staff members that are doing 2 or 3 jobs. And how many times have you seen a nonprofit that's got an individual who's the program director, but oh, guess what? They also know a little bit about social media, and so guess what? They get to do the social media piece too, and somebody else happens to know the IT stuff, and so they get dumped, the IT thing gets dumped on them, and so in their spare time they get to deal with that stuff too. So with this idea, you get specialization, and you free up the staff members' time so that they can do what they do best. And it's a really nice value proposition. So the way that Mac Commonwealth describes their value proposition is that their members get to work on their missions while collectively the MSO can achieve administrative expertise and depth. It can manage expense while offering fully scalable services. It can manage continuity and reduce risk and provide secure state-of-the-art systems and technology, and most importantly, save people time. And it's all done at affordable costs, and it actually reduces expenses. So for Mac Commonwealth, they provide these 3 lines of business. They do finance, HR, and technology. And at least in terms of these lines of business, after 2 years of business, they were actually able to reduce the costs to their members equal to 25 to 50% of the fees that they were spending to purchase the services. So in other words, when I spend money individually to get these services, it costs me more money than when 10 of us are purchasing them together. And so I actually reduce my costs in a lot of cases, particularly when I'm purchasing certain services. The other thing that's happening here is that they are pooling staff positions whenever possible. So if an agency has a vacancy in a position, that position is more likely to get moved into the MSO. And maybe there are reductions in positions too in order to achieve savings. But the idea is to, as much as possible, to move positions into the MSO to achieve efficiencies, because the idea is the MSO can do it much more affordably, but also the quality is going to be better because you're going to be able to pay people better because you're pooling all that money, and you're going to have staff that are dedicated and able to really manage those services much more intensively. Does it make sense? And it could work really nicely for IT. And
well, the MSO is let me put it this way, in papers. So they may be physically in their same locations, and you really may, if it doesn't make sense, may not see any difference in how people work other than,
That's right.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I just want to stress this. Every organization that's a member is still an autonomous organization. This is a membership-based organization, okay? All right, I'm going to move on to the next model. And the next model is a shared service alliance. And I love this model too. I mean, and all of these models are kind of a, you know, there's a theme going on here. They're just different ways of achieving efficiencies, but different ways that organizations can work together. And again, autonomous organization. But now we're kind of moving a little bit further along that collaboration continuum. And there's a little bit more consolidation happening with the Shared Service Alliance, okay? And this is a hub and spoke model in which the hub provides the administration as much as possible for the participants and other shared services to a group of autonomous nonprofit organizations, usually that are in the same business or in the same geographic proximity to one another. And there's many ways to put hub and spoke models together, and today what I want to talk to you about comes from an example called Early Learning Ventures in Colorado. This is for early childhood education. And this is a really interesting model because if you know anything about early childhood education, there's a lot, these are really micro businesses. A lot of early childhood education businesses are like 30 kids. They might have a budget of $100,000, but a lot of their businesses have to be licensed, and they get government contracts, and their government contracts are often based on the quality rating of their services. And the rub here is that you to get quality, you have to pay for quality. You know, so you have to pay more, you have to pay higher salaries to get good quality people, and you need more money to pay for certain kinds of services to get quality. So, but these small businesses to pay for those quality services would have to charge more money to the families, or they would have to go back to government or donors and say, give us more money. And of course, the families can't afford it, and government's not going to give them more. It's kind of a chicken and egg problem. And so they had to design a system that would allow them to achieve efficiency such that they could take the savings and reinvest it back into their program services in order to increase quality. Okay, you following me? So by increasing efficiencies, they could deepen the quality of their business and services and then free up program staff to concentrate on what they do best. One more time. So they had to come up with a way to cut costs, to redirect revenue. And so what they did was they had a really interesting, they had a great foundation, the David and Laura Mirage Foundation, which went around the country creating hub and spoke systems. And they invested money. They only have a budget of about $1 million, but they would go to a group of geographic daycare programs. They would pick the largest one and they would say, would you become the hub? And they would invest some money in helping them set up the infrastructure. And then they would get a group of geographically based daycare centers and ask them if they would become the affiliates. And by agreeing to become an affiliate, you would agree to an ever increasing fee structure that was tied to savings, and you would agree to start shifting over your administrative services to the hub. And so it's a very iterative process. Year by year, more and more of the administrative services would shift to the hub. Whenever a position would become vacant, it would shift to the hub. Whenever they could, they would move their procurement services, their procurement costs over to the hub. They would move fundraising to the hub. And amazing, amazing things happened from this iterative process. Over time, this is what they're able to achieve. they were able to add, for these small little businesses, research and development, bulk purchase of goods and services, comprehensive services like health, mental health, social services, and family support, classroom supports, mentor teachers, classroom assessments, and quality assessment, fundraising and fund development, staff recruitment and screening and substitute teachers, human resources, including health and retirement benefits, unemployment, and insurance, and so on. And of course, they had all the administrative services, payroll, billing, fee collection, marketing for them, tax and finance support, and so on. So the idea, again, is like one of the first things they did was they filled every single slot in the daycare business because, of course, they weren't marketing very well because who was doing the marketing? The executive director. And the executive director was also the person plunging the toilets and taking care of everything else and wasn't marketing very well, so they always had vacancies. So the first thing they did was they filled every vacancy, and but revenue went up, and then they started fundraising, and then they started sharing purchasing, and so you could see just little by little, and then the big thing is they started sharing staff positions, and staff positions started moving over. And, they started out with very small fees, but by the end, their fees were around $40,000 a year per group. But you can see what they were getting back was really incredibly good. And of course, their quality rating went up, and that increased their government contracts than what they were getting for government contracts. So this is just so beautiful. I love this model. Like anybody who tells me, like, I only have a budget of $100,000, we can't do anything. It's like, why can't you collaborate and do this? People tell me I can't do IT. Why can't you do this? What? So the risk is, right? All right, so now everybody has the same systems. My accounting is tied up with your accounting and your accounting and your accounting, and my HR is tied up with your HR and your HR and your HR. But I still have an autonomous organization. I have my own board of directors, my own executive director. We are tied together, but look at what my clients are getting. They're getting so much more than they had before. I'm not hand to mouth anymore. We're doing, the mission so much better. And isn't that what it's about? Isn't that what it's supposed to be about? So I want you to think about this as a new business model in light of the current economic realities, okay? We have to adapt to the economic realities, and this model is brilliant. And it can be used for any kind of nonprofit. Any questions?
I gotta have one. There's a risk around consensus on the service level of the shared service. Could you start out, totally agreeing on what the service level is, and then one of your, spokes goes, we're going to do Cadillac service now, and the others are going, we want to.
Well, I want you to know there's different governing structures for this model. So there's a group of consultants who work only with daycare agencies who go around the country building this hub and spoke model. And every state where they work, they do it differently. So one model that they work with is a group of daycare agencies, and one daycare agency will say, we're going to do the finances because we're really good at that. And somebody else will say, well, we're going to do the fundraising and we're good at that. So they have like a completely different governing model. I would say this one is very hierarchical because of the way the David and Laura Mirage Foundation set it up. You just have to decide how you want to do it. The governance model is really important to your point, okay? How you vote. But yeah, now you're in a group and you're gonna have to live and die by the group, but that's one of the trade-offs. It's one of the trade-offs, my friend. Okay, let's keep going. I want to talk about networks, and this is one that I'm also really incredibly excited about. So this is getting to our theory of complexity, or the idea that there are issues that are so complex, so complicated, that no one nonprofit can really address them, and they're sometimes referred to as wicked problems, okay? And you're going to hear more and more about this. And this comes to us also from Nashville, Tennessee. Well, this is Nashville, Tennessee. Tennessee's doing good stuff. And in Nashville, Tennessee, in 2002, there were 175 nonprofits working separately to improve the schools, and yet they had a high school graduation rate of 58%, and the school attendance rates were incredibly poor. So here you have 175 groups working on the schools, and what do they get for outcomes? 58% graduation rate. It's horrible. So the Nashville Chamber of Commerce decides they're going to do a study and try and figure out what is the problem here. And that study leads to something called Alignment Nashville. And Alignment Nashville identifies 100 nonprofit and civic leaders to come together and create a shared vision around what they're going to do about the school system. And for the next 6 years, they work on developing a plan for how they're going to fix this issue, which becomes the Children and Youth Master Plan. And they roll that out in 2010. And that plan has, I'm sorry, can you see?
Oh, I'm good.
22 committees. All right, so we're talking complex, right? So this is a network, this isn't one organization, but here's how it's governed. 22 committees. There's a board of directors, and the board of directors has the chair and vice chair of each committee. There are 300 participating organizations and 7 dedicated staff who are working on this. Okay? And I want you to know there's lots and lots of examples like the one I'm sharing with you that we could be talking about. After working on this problem for 2 years, the graduation rates rose to 83%. And the truancy rate was reduced by 35 to 40%. Now, the trick in working with networks is that you have to have unbelievable data. Unbelievable data, really good data. They are measuring everything you can imagine in these systems. They're measuring what every nonprofit is doing, trying to really figure out what is having an impact, and tracking all of it in order to figure out, where things are going bad, where they're going well. And that in networks in general, you have to know that data is like king. It's really, really important. Also, empowered community members are critical. So you cannot do a process like this without the community feeling like they are, like this is really, that it's a transparent process and that their role is really sincere. Also, well-known leaders attract partners. So you can't do this and say, well, the community will fix it. You've got to have the people at the top as well, clearly engaged and saying this is important. And you need a formalized structure. So like the structure that you see there, like a way of governing it. And again, every network, you'll see the governing structure is different. This one is a little bit more formal than some that I've seen. But, everybody will figure out what's the right governing structure as you go along. And personally, I think that as you go along, it's going to evolve. And so it's helpful to have a structure that is flexible and that from the beginning is going to evolve so that people don't get so rigid about it. And you need diverse fundraising success. And one thing that I've seen is that as you get success, people will give you more money. It will attract money. And it will attract significant amounts of money. This particular budget had $1 million, and this is in Nashville, Tennessee. It's not such a huge city. It's not an insignificant city by any stretch, but $1 million is a lot of money, I would bet, in Nashville, Tennessee. So, but what other people are saying is that as you get success, you can expect to see more. So there are, just to kind of, one of the biggest consultants working on network strategies, collective impact strategies is FSG, and they say there are 5 conditions for collective impact. So just to summarize, there's a common agenda, shared measurement, mutually reinforcing activities. I'll make my slides available, everybody, so please don't feel like you have to write all this down. Continuous communication, and something they call backbone support. And I want to talk about this because it's kind of interesting. So the idea is that there is at least one institution that's providing the backbone to the whole effort, who's taking responsibility for providing staff that are dedicated to the initiative. Not that they are the leader, okay, and that's really important to understand, but that they are taking responsibility for making sure that the whole thing is happening and continuing and progressing forward. So really exciting stuff happening. Work on childhood obesity. A lot on education is happening with this model right now, because I think it probably got started around education, but there's stuff happening with childhood obesity, healthcare issues, and I think it could be applied to just a lot of different kinds of issues. Okay, so I want to switch over now to cross-sector collaboration. So I'm going to talk to business, to nonprofit, which there are 3 types, and this is the reason I got my piece of paper out, and I want to show them to you. Let me just go quickly over here. So there's 3 types of business to nonprofit models. So the first one is what we're going to think of as unilateral. And in unilateral, and I'm not going to give you a model for each one, but I want you to see it. What's happening is you've got a big entity giving something to a little entity, and usually that's money. So you have like a big corporation makes a grant to a nonprofit, and that's unilateral flow, according to Jim Austin. Okay. Then we have bilateral, and that's 2 entities that are of equal, think of themselves as of equal importance, who are giving to each other, but it's a simple exchange. I give you something, you give me something, and it's just a parallel activity. And then we have what we think of as conjoined, and that is we're giving to each other, but we're doing it within each other's organizations, and we're creating something new. This is the most powerful form of collaboration. This creates the most value. This creates the least. And I want to talk about the third form. Well, let me explain a little bit about that, actually. So, so if this makes sense, this is like a one-sided type of creation, and it's not very sustainable. Does that make sense? So if one person's so powerful, I'm going to give you money, it's not a really sustainable relationship. If you think about it just human to human, if one person's more powerful, it's just not very sustainable. This bilateral is a little bit more sustainable. They're on equal footing, and that there's more of a basis for a relationship there because each is putting in equal amounts and getting out a fair share, and that that can feel good, and that could probably go on for a long time. But yet, what Jim Austin talks about in his book is that they're leaving value on the table when you stop right there. This may be a stage, these may be stages that collaborations go through. You start here, then you say, you know what, this is you start to feel people out for a relationship and they say, well, let's move to this stage. And then this feels pretty good, and then you go, let's go to this stage. And then sometimes people jump right to this stage, or they can jump to this stage. Does that make sense? Just from a practical perspective, like when you think about yourself as a person, does that all make sense? It seems really logical to me too.
Can
Yeah.
one organization have multiple collaborations with different entities?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I think I quoted to you, there was like an average of 5 in that California example. So you want to have as many as you possibly can. There may be some that are more important than others. So I want to talk about that conjoined example. And this one talks about the Nature Conservancy and Georgia Pacific. And maybe people have heard about this one. This has been written about. There's cases about this one. So you have the Nature Conservancy, which said, okay, we have knowledge of environmental science. And they went to Georgia Pacific. And Georgia Pacific had all this forest management skills. And they have conjoined the two institutions. They work collaboratively together in order to increase the power to achieve economic and conservation goals in a sustainable manner. And by integrating what each of them does, they have changed each other. You know, Georgia Pacific is changed as an institution. And we could have a long conversation about the value proposition. The value proposition is very sophisticated. They think of it on many, many different levels. But the value proposition is not just what happens from a mission perspective, but what happens to them internally and externally. So what happens to the Nature Conservancy because they have this relationship with Georgia Pacific from an external perspective, how it affects their brand, how each of their brands are affected by the other, but also how their employees are affected by the relationship, how they think, how they act, and this has been a long-standing relationship, and to the point where they don't even need to think about the relationship anymore. The relationship is always there. That's how much they think of being together in this collaboration. And that's what happens when you're in this conjoined relationship, cross-sector. These are underutilized kinds of collaborations, I believe. And I know in my practice, I have not had an opportunity to work on cross-sector, and I'm going to spend a lot more time really promoting them, because I think that, again, we're leaving value on the table. There's a lot more opportunity to be gaining value for nonprofits and our missions by being in these kinds of relationships with businesses. Make sense? Yeah?
I just have a question about how do you coach organizations that aren't thinking about this sort of really intimate collaboration? Like what kind of questions do you ask of the business or ask of the organization to encourage this?
Well, you know what, let's talk about this slide. So what I say to people is, I think you have to think about, what are you trying to accomplish as an organization? Where are you stuck? What is the environment? What's happening in your environment that is posing a barrier to you? And how might a collaboration be a strategy that can help you address the barriers in your environment? So that's where the conversation happens, with organizations. And so we kind of begin to explore what that might look like, depending on the situation. So if somebody is, interested in growing, and they feel and they are hampered because they don't have the resources for growth. We talk about, well, who might be out there who you could grow with? Let's explore what that might look like, and paint a picture so that people get an idea begin to get a feel for what that could be like for them. You know, so I think it really helps to paint pictures and to do things like this. Let's look at what some other people have done so you can get an idea for what it might be like for you.
Sounds like dating.
It's a lot like dating. It totally is. But, you know, it is like that. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did.
Yeah.
What
So,
examples would be cool if you have those?
other examples of what people, of how to get people to think of, you know,
No, of partnerships that are working like this.
Like this one?
Similar to the Nature Conservancy.
Throw one out and ask if it is an example. Remember Shore Bank?
Mm-hmm.
Now, Shore Bank was basically essentially a not-for-profit focused on.
they would not like it if you said that, but, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Focused on community development. However, I can't tell you how many other, bankers from, Chase or other banks who were investors in Shore Bank because Shore Bank could satisfy their, community development, requirements, essentially government requirements. So would that be an example, a relationship between Shore Bank doing the community development work for, say a big bank like Chase that's just essentially giving them money to do that?
Well, that's like a business-to-business partnership. They were definitely a for-profit entity, Shore Bank, and I think they, but I think that in many ways, yeah. I mean, I think that they would say, that Chase did it to fulfill their CRA credit,
Right.
and that there was incentive there for that reason. So I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure what your question is.
I'm wondering if that would be an example of.
Of other examples like this?
Right, of business to not-for-profit collaboration. But I guess you're saying no, because
No,
Shore
you know
Bank's
what?
not a not-for-profit.
You know what, there are, I'm trying to think of, you know what, I'm sorry, I didn't prepare more examples, but I could email you some examples, and I'm sorry, I just didn't I didn't prepare more for today. There are lots and lots of examples, and I just didn't bring
And
any
the
more.
author covers, and the author of that book.
The author has, if you get this book, you will have bazillions of them. He has tons in his book.
What book?
Yeah, what book
So
is it?
this is the book I've been quoting. Here, let me get you back. This is Jim Austin's book. Let me see if I've got it right there. So Creating Value in Nonprofit Business Collaborations. This is Jim Austin and May Satanidi, their book. It's a brand new book. Actually, you know what? Here it is. So I did bring it. This is it. And do you want me to, you know what, let me page through because he's got a whole bunch, if you want me to just do that. Actually, you want to look at it?
Yeah,
I don't think I should take my time doing
yeah,
this, but
let's move on with the presentation.
here's the book.
We can do that offline.
Okay, all right, so, let's see, we did this, okay. So what I wanted to say about, this is, when you're getting involved, and this is true for any kind of collaboration, but particularly for these cross-sector collaborations, that there are potential barriers that you have to think about, and you have to explore with whoever your partner might be. But also, you have to remember that what's different about your partner is also potentially what makes your partner a really good partner, okay? Like having somebody who's exactly like you isn't necessarily a strength, okay? But it depends on the situation and what you're trying to achieve. So complementarities are really good. So if you think about it, particularly in business, with a business, partnering with a business, you don't necessarily want somebody who's weak in the areas where you're weak. You want somebody who's strong. But that also creates the possibility for problems. So you have to really think about mission and objectives. You really have to think about values. All right? You have to explore what are their values and make clear what are your values. All right? And so on. I won't read the whole list to you, But, and you'll gradually get a greater sense of what is their culture like and your culture. Because these are things that could create rubs in terms of the partnership. And you cannot overlook them. But what Jim Austin believes, and I think it makes a lot of sense, is if the thing you're trying to achieve is of such importance, my guess is that you could work out whatever these rubs are. You will work them out. You will find a workaround for each one, but you have to identify what the problems are. You cannot deny them. You cannot, pretend that they're not there. You have to kind of face them squarely. Does that make sense? Okay. So a little bit about picking partners. And this is what I like to do about picking partners, and this is true for for-profits and nonprofits. I think it really helps to have done a SWOT analysis of your own organization. So are people familiar with what a SWOT is? So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. If you've done a strategic plan, you've probably done a SWOT to get an idea of what it is you're looking for in a partner. So generally speaking, you want a partner who's helping you address your weaknesses and address your threats, depending on what the situation may be. But it's always good to have done that scan relatively recently so that you're just kind of clear about that. So for example, you might be looking for somebody with strong technical ability or great geographic coverage or a really strong infrastructure. And then to be able to rank prospects based on who can give you the maximum results. Then it's also just important to think about general characteristics of partners. So you want to think about, hey, do I trust this person who I'm talking to or this institution? Do you have a history of working together? And if you don't have any history of working together, it's probably a good idea to start out with simple things and gradually do bigger and bigger things before you kind of dive into something that has a lot of risk. And you want to think about, do you have a shared vision, mission, or strategy alignment, in some way. So the second step is that you want to reach out to your top prospects, have coffee, talk, discuss a potential partnership, get their feedback. What is their reaction to what you're talking about? And then share the results internally with your team, your board, whoever that might be that's appropriate, in order to get a sense of who do you think makes the most sense to go forward with. And then in terms of selecting your partners, you want to outline with that prospect your vision, goals, and strategies. You want to identify your values again. You want to determine what resources will be needed and how they will be obtained. You want to complete due diligence on each other. You want to make sure that your partner isn't about to face, bankruptcy or worse. And you want to design a governance method. And all of this should be put in writing. And whether that's in writing in terms of it being just a simple memorandum of understanding, which is not legally binding, or a contract, really depends on what it is you're saying you're going to do. And there's more that can go into that depending on, again, what is it that you're planning to do. You may want an attorney to be drafting something for you. So you'll get guidance on that from your board or from somebody else. Okay, let's talk about, let me stop there. Does anybody have any questions about what I just covered? I went through that partnership piece kind of fast. No? Okay. So there is money to fund collaborations, and if you haven't seen it, the Chicago Community Trust has a collaboration fund that funds collaborations and mergers, which is really nice. They fund 3 times a year, and then they also have some funding that they can make available up to $25,000 on pretty short notice. So Jim Lewis has been the person in charge of that fund. People don't know about that, so that's a great source. If you haven't been a grantee of the trust, I'm not sure that you can apply for those funds, by the way, but hopefully you or your partner have. And then there's a national source called the Sea Change Lodestar Fund, which is based out of New York. That's fantastic. They will fund up to 1/3 of what they call the eligible expenses of a collaboration, but it has to be matched locally. So generally speaking, you're going to them with your implementation budget. You're not gonna go to them necessarily with upfront costs, but it's really nice, like, they'll fund the uninspiring costs of collaboration. So if you need money for an attorney or to break a lease or all different kinds of crazy things, they'll pay for that. They're really great. And then the Boeing Foundation has been funding, and Grand Victoria, under certain circumstances, has. Polk Brothers has been really great as well. And then finally, I really encourage people to think about their current donors. So if you have a really great case to make for your collaboration, your current donors very often will fund a collaboration, particularly if you can make a case to them that this is a really great strategic opportunity, even if they don't necessarily fund collaboration as one of their eligible things that they fund. Any questions about funding? I must be a really great trainer because no one has any questions about anything. Okay, well, I don't want to just go straight into the summary. Anybody have any questions about any kind of collaboration? Is anybody getting involved in a collaboration that they want to discuss?
One thing that I would like to pitch out, just to have its own kind of reserved and open space to have a conversation is, in terms of, so you were talking about backbone, supported institutions. So, that's what this is, the Chicago School of Data. And in terms of, targeting for technical support that's outside of organizations, I just wanted to suggest that I'm sticking around for the afternoon, the open session, and that also I'll try to tweet out a location. But I would really like to hear, in terms of ways that there could be like a central technical capacity, so that we can have a dedicated space to hear from your nonprofits, if that's where you're housed. Talk about what your needs are, what that needs to be, so that we can get guys like Dan O'Neill, so that we can get the rest of like the data science and technical community in Chicago to figure out what that collaboration is. Among many models that you've been walking through, so that we can do that around technology evaluation, data sourcing.
Great, awesome, yes.
I just have kind of a general question, and I'm from a university, so this may sound, but like, why hasn't, this almost seems like a no-brainer, like why hasn't more people been collaborating on this whole time? Like, what barriers do you see? You talked a little bit about some of the barriers, but what's stopping people? Are they just siloed? Is that part of it?
I don't want to make it sound like people aren't collaborating. I just think that I think people are collaborating, but at a very simple level, and I think that they are, again, leaving value on the table. They could be collaborating more deeply. I also think that I think there's a problem with adequate resources, and I think that it's a lot of work to collaborate. I don't want to make it sound like it's a simple thing, and I think people are somewhat overwhelmed with just trying to keep their own organizations going, and so the thought of trying to create this kind of, something really complex is, staggering. I really do. I think people can't quite figure out where the time would come from to be able to do that. So it is problematic. That's why I think resources would be really helpful to create the bandwidth for organizations to have like maybe extra staff who would be able to dedicate that kind of time to address these things. But I'd like to go back to that network example. When you have 175 nonprofits working on trying to improve education, but they're all working as solo organizations, and you think about what the strain is on the public education system just trying to support 175 nonprofits to do that. I mean, it's crazy. It's just, it's lunacy, you know? And that goes on all the time in our community. And somehow we've got to say, time out. You know, I just think we as nonprofits just have to say, you know what, we've got to come up with a better way, because this is not only not solving the problem, but it's wasting a lot of resources. So I don't really have a better answer. Does anybody else have a better answer?
I've done work around building collaboration within organizations where just one department in this corporation is siloed from another department in the corporation. And the change there, a lot of that has come from my perspective around there's technology to do this that didn't exist 10 years ago. If you're sharing human resources, then someone else is going to have data about, you know, your people, and well, I think the opportunity to do that is coming from lowering up the cost of technology to share that data, and the ability to actually share that data across, you know, across the silos.
Yeah, yeah.
I would just add something, not that I have too much experience in this, but just from a sociological perspective. And I would love to hear your comments on this. This is just an idea. But one of the big barriers I could see with collaborations would be just the very idea that you have to centralize your data, or just you would have to share things with other people. You don't want to give up your own. You don't want to give up your own. I guess the word would be privacy or ownership of your own information. If you work in a collaboration, your name also becomes a little bit smaller. You don't want to lose like the credit that would go with doing something amazing or large. Any opinions?
So the idea is that people would need to centralize what they're doing, but without losing the credit for that. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I mean, I feel like, you know, as much as information is available, I think that there's still a problem with people not knowing what's going on. Do you know what I mean? And if there was a way, if maybe that would help with that problem.
In fact, you know, I have a question for you. Let's say I was speaking with a group of organizations and asking them to collaborate. Do you have any tips for asking them to get over possibly their fear of giving up their autonomy or giving up their...
Yeah, I think if you ask them that, they would say we do collaborate. But the question is, what do we mean by collaboration? You know, that's partly why I went through that definition chart, because what people mean by collaboration is I go to a meeting with other organizations and we sit and we talk. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about actually integrating, you know, where we are working on common outcomes and we're integrating our program or our corporate structures to be able to achieve things together. That they are not doing. And, you know, unfortunately we don't have a really good term to describe that. Sometimes we say strategic restructuring, but, you know, people hate that term. And collaboration just doesn't really describe what we mean here. So I don't know what the solution is. Donors don't really want to drive a lot of this. They feel like it's overstepping. So unless nonprofits just say, we're going to stop this, we're going to stop it, I don't see how it's going to happen, to tell you the truth. Other comments on this? I mean, does anybody else have an opinion about why it's not happening? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm also don't have a lot of personal experience and don't work for nonprofits, but I often work with them. And something that I've found is, particularly with smaller ones, which would be the ones that don't have enough resources, presumably, the way that they've been built as an organization really is problem, then solve it, which I guess is a strategic restructuring problem. But these like efficiency motivations or motivations about like, you know, planning ahead of time or making all these plans really just fundamentally is not how a lot of nonprofits not only are originally built, but then continue to grow. They grow a lot more organically, and like we started here and then we discovered this problem, so then we moved over here, which means that what happened 2 years ago is maybe even lost. So there's just something that's like, you know, fundamentally within the structure and foundation of how and why people work in nonprofits that's kind of like
not.
It's crazy.
Yes.
You know, what you said reminded me. I think the way we work is that we let nonprofits die. Okay, like we're going through this huge we're going through an enormous, I don't know if you know this, we're going through the largest human service restructuring right now than we've ever seen in our lifetimes. And that is through managed care transition that's happening because of the Affordable Care Act and because of Medicaid expansion. We're gonna lose hundreds of nonprofits. And I think that a lot of people feel like good riddance, like they would much rather see that happen than actually face up and say to organizations, you need to merge, you need to collaborate, let's save the equity that's invested in these organizations. We don't want to be direct by telling organizations what they want to do, but we will be passive aggressive about saying, okay, you can all die. You can just go die. And it's really that simple, what's happening. And organizations, you know, keep their head in the sand because they keep thinking, well, tomorrow will be a better day. You know, it's that kind of, Never Land or something. So I think we have to look at the environment realistically and see what the environment is telling us. But there are better ways of doing things. You know, I really love what happened in Colorado with the Mirage Foundation, because the Mirage Foundation said, look, I'm going to go to these daycare businesses and I'm going to give them a value proposition. I'm going to give some money to one of you to become a hub, and I'm going to help all of you become stronger, but you're going to have to develop a different business model. And all of these groups are responding. And they are, over time, you know, they're creating more and more of these. And what would happen if we had a Mirage Foundation in Illinois doing that for human service agencies, just being very proactive? Yeah.
One thing that I feel like I keep hearing is that someone is bringing this to the table to nonprofits and asking them to participate in something that's going to be beneficial for a lot of different reasons, from someone coming with expertise. That's something that I see in the community that I'm involved with. That's collaboration is being imposed on us, and we're participating in it, but it's really hard to see change happening, and it's really hard to see the benefit for everyone for all the work that we're putting into it.
Yeah.
So we are going through the process of having meetings and having trying to collectively make decisions and hold each other accountable, but it's also still tied up within our funding, and it's still very much a system where people can die easily, and they are, and this is all part of the human services, homeless service programming in Chicago, but it's just not easy to see that we're all being positively impacted by
That's the
it.
continuum you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a complex thing.
Yeah.
Well,
Our time is up,
yeah.
unfortunately. So let's hear it for Gene. That's fantastic.
Go out and collaborate. Go out and
Yes, collaborate. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just tweeted out the suggestion at 2 o'clock to return to this room, and I hashtagged it, so we can hopefully get other folks who are interested in this conversation. So I encourage you to come back after lunch if you're interested in giving feedback to Chicago School of Data about how to have regular kind of capacity building, training, things like that.
Great.
So it's not just like big events like this.
Good. All right.
Great.
Nice to talk to you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know what? I'm so embarrassed to say I forgot to bring some cards.
Oh, we'll give her a card.
Can I give you this thing? Oh, give me a card and I'll send you.
Yeah, I'd like to talk with you, get to know you better so I can hug you, because you've actually triggered a light bulb in my head.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we're talking about.
Awesome.
Well, like, what's gonna happen with it? Like, is
Yeah,
it
sure,
gonna
sure.
meet us frequently?
Good.
Like, what's going on?
What
Oh, you get a book. Yeah, it's awesome.